Welcome to another edition of INN CEO Talks. Joining me today is Ali Haji, the CEO of Ion Energy, which trades on the TSX Venture Exchange under the symbol ION, and on the OTC as IONGF. As well, the company also trades on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange under the symbol 5YB. Ion Energy is located in a unique position physically and at the crossroads of lithium demand. All indications suggest that the lithium market will stabilize in 2021, and demand is expected to increase as the world converts to electric vehicles. George Miller of Benchmark Mineral Intelligence says prices have recently started to increase in the domestic Chinese market, and we're seeing surging demand on the back of a strong upward trend in EV sales in the US and Europe. Now, what makes Ion particularly interesting is its location. They're just 24 kilometers from the Mongolia-Chinese border, and they're within hundreds of kilometers of the large battery manufacturers in China, and not too far away are plants in Korea and Japan. The company's Baavhai Lithium Brine project is an 81,000 plus acre site. It is the largest, and it is the first lithium brine exploration award granted in Mongolia. Ali, welcome. I have a lot of questions for you today, and so I hope you got a bit of time that you can stay with us. So let's start with the location and the scale of the project, and we'll go from there. Tell us about that location, why it's so important.
Absolutely, Stuart. Thank you for the introduction. Just one small correction there. It's 81,000 hectares, not acres.
Hectares,
So
yes.
you're absolutely right. A sizable license, to say the least. It is located in the Sukhothai province, which is in the southeastern part of the country there. It is a very dry and arid environment. It resides within the Gobi Desert, 81,000 hectares stretching almost about 100 kilometers wide and 30 kilometers north to south. So indeed, a very massive allocation of land. In fact, so large that it is the largest land package for any mineral or any resource granted to a private or public company by the government of Mongolia. It's located along the lines of the infrastructure from Ulaanbaatar to Erlian being the primary border crossing into China. China is by default Mongolia's largest trading partner. So the license at its closest point to the Chinese border is only about 24 kilometers away. The railway into China is a good 60 kilometers west of our existing license. But that goes to show that the infrastructure in place would lend itself well to supplying the Chinese machine as it starts to increase demand, as you so rightly mentioned.
Tell us a little bit about the geology there as well that makes this such a valuable resource.
Absolutely. The geology, having looked at it, from the early days, I think the Russian government in the 50s did a fair bit of work out there looking for, it might have been potable water or what have you, but when they pulled up this brine aquifer from about 20 meters below surface, it was saline in nature, very similar to a brine that you would find in the Atacama. And they chalked it down to being non-potable water and sort of moved on. The Russians and the Mongolians did a joint exercise in the 90s. They were able to obtain this very same brine. At the time, they tested it for a plethora of minerals, lithium included, but found that it did in fact lie only about 20 meters below surface. The depth of that actual aquifer is yet to be determined. In 2016, the geology department at the University of Science and Technology, led by Dr. Hashbat Dashtet-Seren, who's a PhD lithium hydrogeologist, spent a fair bit of time in the South Gobi region looking for lithium. They were able to find hard rock outcrops, but importantly for us on the Baavhai license, they determined that it was in fact an endoheric basin, very similar to what you'd find in the Atacama. And what that means in essence is all precipitation that's fallen on that region, in our case since the Cretaceous period, has never gone out to an external body of water. So it's percolated through the rocks to build this aquifer beneath surface, which when they did some testing back in 2016, were able to find brine near surface at grades of up to 811 ppm. So geologically speaking, having conferred with experts in the field, including Don Haynes, who's on our advisory board, and I'm sure we'll talk about him a bit later, the geology very much mirrors what you would find in the Latin or the lithium triangle in Latin America. And that's what's made us extremely excited about the prospect as we start to go down our exploration path.
You touched on the fact that none of this resource has ever, transited the area, leaving via water to open ocean or whatnot. Why is that important?
It's important because it forms a lot of dilution. If you were to think of the St. Lawrence River in Canada, for instance, if there were any minerals in the valleys or the drainage basin that supplies it with its mighty current, a lot of that would be lost to the ocean. An endorheic basin is different in that it all gets it's sort of like an inland lake, but one that sits below surface, a subterranean lake that is trapped sort of on land that doesn't have the ability to go out to an external body of water. So over time, millions of years, that concentration of those minerals in and around that region concentrate in this aquifer beneath surface, and that's what makes it valuable from a brine production perspective.
Mm-hmm. You're in Mongolia, you're right there on the Chinese border. How has this region now going to benefit from the improved trading relations between China and Russia?
Yeah, the One Belt, One Road initiative is a big part of what's happening across the Asian sort of subcontinent. China has gone as far as to develop resources outside of the Eurasian subcontinent, including Africa and the like. But the infrastructure that the One Belt, One Road initiative is putting in place would allow for those minerals or those goods and services to transfer across borders far more easily. China today, is one of the largest lithium markets in the world. They consume 53% of the world's lithium. They produce 73% of the world's batteries. They refine 80% of all lithium that goes in batteries worldwide. So having China on our doorstep is advantageous, extremely advantageous relative to any producers in, say, Latin America or some of the hard rock projects in Australia. From a purely shipment and logistic perspective, we would be fairly confident in stating we would keep our costs low enough to entice an offtake agreement from the Chinese, the Japanese, the Taiwanese, the Koreans. Some would say the Indians, the Germans, and the US as well. So we think we're very well placed in terms of our geography and our location, but we're also strategic in the sense that global geopolitics today play a big role in where we're going to be obtaining the necessary battery metals of the future.
Well, right, because we've also seen a shift in the administration in the United States. There's a greater focus on electric vehicles, and the U.S. has just declared that lithium is now a valued metal and has elevated its status. So how important is that in us understanding not just your deposit, but what the market is doing and how that's going to put extra demand on lithium production?
Absolutely. I think, Stuart, this all culminated over the last summer or so. It's been a long time coming, and there have been a lot of companies, corporations, governments talking about sort of a greener future. But it really was sped up over the last summer as a result of the pandemic. The pandemic forced governments around the world to print vast sums of money as a recovery effort to restart their economies. And in doing so, a lot of governments around the world, made it clear that the intent was to ensure that a green recovery was made out of COVID. For instance, the EU had a 750 billion euro plan approved. Of that, 576 billion was footnoted with a sustainable caveat, 20 billion directly allocated to battery metals and gigafactory incentivization. That in turn prompted what I like to call a vertical integration in the battery metal space, unlike anything we've seen in the past. So, it forced companies like Mercedes to buy a stake in a battery manufacturer named Ferasis in China, who then had an offtake agreement from a lithium producer in Australia. Unlike anything we've ever seen in the resource space. You couple that with the sort of further deployment of the LFP battery, the lithium ferrophosphate battery, which has increased the range of a battery from 100,000 miles to 1,000,000 miles before it requires replacement, and reduced the cost by about 40 cents. So now you have a government subsidy, a cheaper, longer lasting battery, and a consumer that is becoming more and more aware of the impacts of fossil fuels, that's moving towards adopting these electric vehicles. So this trend that we've seen, or this rather uptick in demand, is a result of not only government spending, but also advancements in technology. And so we're seeing, as you mentioned during your introduction, prices are in fact going up in China, which means that is the early warning indicator of global supply and demand for the battery metals. And to touch briefly on your Biden and inauguration comment, I think it's evident that Biden and his government have put a fair amount of money towards electric vehicle subsidies and the like. GM just announced a $1.5 billion plant in Michigan. That's massive news. They've also said they won't produce any internal combustion engines after 2035. So the U.S., the new U.S., if you want to call it that, it has truly embraced this concept relative to the previous administration, and we're seeing, in and around the range of $400 billion being put aside by the Biden administration for the next 4 years for this very purpose. So yes, lithium is in fact deemed a critical metal. It is one that has been put on a strategic list by the U.S. government and other governments alike. And I'd be rather surprised if wars were being fought over battery metals in the way that they have been on for oil historically, so to speak. This is a dynamic sort of environment. It is truly an inflection point in the paradigm shift in the requirements of energy of the future.
Right. There might be some people who would look at the lithium market right now and go, well, hang on a second. Lithium demand dropped last year after the Chinese government removed its subsidies for the purchase of electric vehicles. But we've seen that stabilize. But there was the reaction to that, of course, is that there was a cutback in production and kind of a dip in exploration. How does that then position you to be able to capitalize on the coming surge that everybody predicts is coming?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, last year the world was very much upside down. Pandemics around the world forced a lot of governments to institute lockdowns, which in turn meant that most commuters were not commuting. We were all working from home. The demand for vehicles started to increase sort of towards the end of last year when folks were afraid of taking public transit and wanted to get to their place of work or otherwise in their own private vehicle. If you look at, again, the LFP advance, so the LFP being the lithium ferrophosphate battery that's in exclusive production in the Chinese Model 3 factory, that's now been pushed out to 10 European markets as well. That sort of slowly culminated in, yes, there's a lack of demand, there's a bit of a job security issue for a lot of people, and people weren't spending on these capital assets. But as things started to turn and the technology increased and the subsidies were increased as well by governments around the world, the adoption rate started to pick up. And if you look at the numbers today, I think Canaccord did a call about 2 weeks ago, and they said, their January year-to-date numbers have been beaten. They've been far exceeded by any analyst estimate imagination. Last year, lithium prices were down and close to bottom. But then now they're starting to turn. So NIO, in China, making a big push into the EV space. China is now buying more EVs than this side of the world per capita. Norway is doing a significant amount in that regard as well. So this increment in demand, coupled with those government subsidies and advancement in technology, is driving that price to start to turn around now, and we should see that continue. The analysts last year would have told you that we might have had 8 months or so in 2021 that would have been bearish for the lithium sector. We've seen as of January they've already started to increase prices. So the bulls are coming in the lithium space, and the demand is definitely not far behind.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about your project. Where are you at in the development of the site? What are the next steps over the short term and, let's say, over the next year?
Absolutely. So, our site was given to us on very little exploration having been done, and the fundamentals surrounding the geology and sort of the outcrops of lithium in and around that space drove us to believe that it was a significant asset. So while those samples gave us results of up to 811 ppm, that's just scratching the surface in our opinion. We began an exploration program in October of last year, which included a geophysics CSAMT program. That allows you to determine the conductivity of the ore body beneath surface, and as a result, to understand how many chemicals are truly dissolved within that region. Beyond that, we were to commence our microseismic program, which would have given us the depth, the thickness, and the width of that aquifer body beneath surface. But Mongolia, being a country that managed the pandemic really well, in fact, so well that they didn't enter into a lockdown until October of last year. That was our very first lockdown following the global health pandemic, or the World Health Organization declaring a pandemic. That in turn put a little bit of a delay on our program, so we weren't able to complete our geophysics last year. The team has been back out there since January 10th, completing that. They've now completed their CSAMT program on one of our targets. They will be moving to the second in short order here. Beyond the CSAMT, that seismic will commence, and the company actually acquired truck-mounted auger capable of drilling down to 20 meters. We acquired that back in 2019. It's currently in country. So irrespective of these pandemics and lockdowns, the team in country has all the equipment and the skill set necessary to conduct these exploration programs. When we start to pull out the brine samples using the auger rig in and around mid Q2, we'd get a sense of average grade along the continuity of the aquifer. Rudimentarily, one would imagine if you have a liquid volume with an average grade, you could perhaps come up with an early resource estimate. Granted, it's not 4311 compliant or JORC compliant, but that will give us a true sense of what we're sitting on. So that's the really exciting bit of news that you could expect over the next couple of quarters. Beyond that, we will be deploying a diamond core rig into the same site as well. The diamond core rig will allow us to determine the porosity of the rock, and that's important, obviously, because I like to use the analogy of a Wendy's Frosty. The first time you get it, if it's rather frozen, you need to use a spoon to eat it, but as it starts to melt, you can suck it through a straw. So no matter how much lithium might be in the ground, it's important to have a porous sort of foundation in order for you to extract it. And then we'd also look at, obviously, a better chemical analysis. So let's determine, is this one where we can use evaporation as our technique to potentially bring this to production? Or is it one in which we would use a direct extraction technology type methodology to extract the lithium? So it's still very early days in terms of proving a resource. But this year, along with the catalysts that are upcoming and obviously the demand in the market, will accelerate our programs for exploration and in turn acquisition in country as well.
Investors are always asking themselves, okay, who are you? What's your background in this space, in mining in general? And tell us about your team. And I note that yesterday you just announced that you brought on a new advisor, somebody with some rather exceptional credentials. Let's start talking about him, and then tell me about the rest of the team.
Absolutely. So, you're absolutely right. We added Dr. Hashbat Dashtitsaren to our team yesterday. He is a lithium PhD hydrogeologist that's educated at the University of Science and Technology in Mongolia. He spent a fair bit of time in Japan at the Akita University, studying lithium exploration and refinement models and methodologies. He's had a vast amount of experience exploring Mongolia. He's sat on the board of a number of Mongolian companies. And having an individual of his skill set that understands the country, but also where the lithium mineralizations exist in country, I think is extremely invaluable. It also is a nod to the skill set and the overall quality of the Mongolian people in the mining space. 20% of their GDP is directly attributed to mining. And so the skill set that you would see in Mongolia from a mining perspective is rather vast. So very happy to have Dr. Hashbat on board. With respect to the broader team, I've had over 13 years of international asset management experience. I started my career in Toronto at Invesco, sort of moved to Hong Kong to work on a number of different initiatives, including AIG's real estate business acquisition by Invesco. Moved back to Toronto, worked on a number of strategic initiatives, including the Morgan Stanley Van Kampen acquisition. And more recently, I was centered in London, co-leading a center of excellence in the investment operations space. So I moved back to Toronto about 3.5 years ago and joined Atma Capital Markets as a consultant and as an advisor to Step Gold, which is another Mongolian play that we have that I was part of. So you might ask yourself, where is my mining experience prior to all of that? And that's a valid question. My father has been in mining in Zambia since 1998, exporting copper concentrate to the Chinese. So that's sort of my background in mining. My chairman, Mr. Matthew Wood, is an Australian national, a Rio Tinto scholar, gold geologist by trade, but also one that is, marries the entrepreneurial side with the geological side. Very hard combination to find in this industry. He was, he set up a number of different companies around the world and brought them either to production or exited. His most recent exit was Avanco Resources sale to Oz Minerals in Brazil. That sold in March 2018 for $440 million. So a man that's really done a fair bit of work internationally, but importantly, in 2009, he met his wife today, who is a Mongolian national, moved to Mongolia in 2009 looking for gold. Ended up accumulating a number of coal assets during the last coal boom, took it public on the ASX for $20 million, accelerated the exploration and acquisition strategy, thereby de-risking those assets, and then sold in an all-cash deal to Banpu of Thailand for $500 million 18 months later. So that was the first foray into Mongolia that
Yeah.
really gave us a foundation to work off of that proved and showed success of the team and the ability to execute. Would you like me to cover all of them? I'm happy to.
Well, I think that what we can do is we can let viewers go to your website and
Please,
read
yeah.
the experience of the other members of your team. It's an impressive team, but in describing your history and the history of others in your team, it raises the question: what is your long-term plan? Do you envision building this out, or do you see establishing this as a resource and then vending it into a major?
It's a good question, Stuart, but I'm going to just add a couple more quick comments about the team before we move on. So we have
Sure.
two other Mongolian board members that I think are important, and we do operate as a Mongolian company traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange. That's important because it provides goodwill with the government, but also pays taxes in country, and therefore you're operating almost unhinged or uninhibited rather,
Yeah.
because you are a Mongolian company. And then the other two folks that I think require a special mention are folks on our special advisory board, and they are Paul Fornazzari. He is the original chairman of Lithium Americas. He was a director at NEO and is a partner at Fasken, so a pioneer in the lithium brine space as far as this side of the world is concerned. And then Don Haynes, a very technical individual that is a geologist by trade, that's essentially driving our exploration program from a distance and has had a vast amount of experience in the space. Right. So to go back to your question, if you wouldn't mind repeating it, Stuart, I've sort of lost my train of thought there.
Well, thank you for adding in those two other members of your team because their credentials are impressive as well. So is your plan to build out this resource and turn it into an operating mine site, or do you envision vending into a major in the future?
Valid question. I think for now, our focus and our goal is truly to de-risk these assets and continue to accumulate assets in country that have been de-risked a fair bit through exploration to show their economic viability. In terms of actually going out to market and raising, say $500 million to bring this thing to production, we would not do that independently. We would bring in a JV partner at the right valuation, at the right currency to take a toehold in and thus allow us to bring it to production. Or ultimately, very much follow the model that we had in place for Hunun Coal, which is have a JV type scenario, or have a major come in at a later date and take a significant chunk of the company, and we can stay on as sort of advisors or a minority holder.
Right. So the question that all potential investors are asked: why now? Why is now the right time for me to put my money behind Ion Energy?
That's a great question. I think, if you look at when we went public, and I've said this to a few investors and they call me brave, and I take that with a grain of salt, but we went public in August of 2020. And that's a time when you weren't seeing many IPOs, particularly in the resource sector. Folks were, again, we didn't know what side was up in the world. And when we went public, we priced the deal at 30 cents a share. 30 cents a share, we raised $2.7 million. Our minimum raise from the TSX was $1.3 million, so we more than doubled that based on demand and relationships that we had built, plus individuals really coming to see this green revolution turn around. When we went public at that price, our post-money valuation was $15.5 million. If you were to look at us on a comparable basis to any of our peers that hold a similar acreage or hectarage with a similar grade, two analysts had valued us at in excess of $40 million post-money. So we went public at a $15 million market cap. We look at our valuation today, having added folks to the team that are, their credentials are bar none. They are world class. We've also commenced our exploration program. We've been able to continue what we're doing uninterrupted. And today, I'm just going to peek over here. Our market cap today is about $25 million. So there's still significant upside to go to reach that $40 million that analysts have now reiterated. In the last week or so, we've had a share price target of 88 cents from Couleur Capital in Vancouver, 96 cents from Fundamental Research. Trading at 52 cents today, there's significant upside to come. And I think once we start to put out our exploration results, which will be in about 3 to 5 weeks following today, we'll start to catch up to what our valuation should be, if not exceed it. I mentioned earlier that the team's priority and strategy is, in fact, to acquire additional licenses in country that are lithium bearing and then thus de-risk them through exploration. And that, in fact, is in full swing. So we have not taken our pedal off that part of the business or that strategy. In fact, by the time this airs, I assume we will have announced an acquisition in and around the region that we're currently operating today.
Pretty exciting at the moment. It must be very, you must like be chomping at the bit to wake up in the morning and take on what is next coming at you, because the world, as we have discussed, is changing and the demand for lithium is on the increase. Will you come back in a couple of months and give us an update?
I'd be more than happy to, Stuart.
Yeah, would love to have you back. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you taking the time to give us as much in-depth information as you can at this point about the company, the project, and the markets, as well as your team. Looks like an exciting future for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart.